Half-Life Opposing Force, released in 1999, was developed by Gearbox Software and was their debut title. They later went on to develop Half-Life Blue Shift in 2001, which included new quote-unquote HD models, and Half-Life Decay in that same year, which included better quality models with facial animations, animated clothing, and more. Throughout this video, I'll refer to Half-Life Opposing Force as OP4, Half-Life Blue Shift as Blue Shift, and Half-Life Decay as Decay, in order to save time and breath. Let us commence forth with a brief overview of each of the 3 expansion packs in the Half-Life 1 quadrilogy. OP4 is set just shortly before the end of Forget About Freeman, and as you play as Adrian Shepard, a gas mask-wearing member of the Hazardous Environment Combat Unit, or HECU for short. Keep that in mind, I'm not done with it yet. In the boot camp, the game establishes the routine of the HECU, as well as name-dropping the vest they use, the PCV. It's also revealed that said vest uses the same battery power as HEV suits, meaning Black Mesa likely sold their armor tech to the military. The game also features Adrian's diary in the instruction manual that came with the game's physical release. In it, it's revealed that at least some of, if not all, the HECU that are sent to Black Mesa were low-ranking Marines that got promoted by G-Man. Reinforcing that fact, Adrian Shepard is established to be a corporal, and since every single grunt you encounter in the game obeys your orders and follows you around, it can be safely assumed that they are all privates, PFCs, or Lance Corporals. Keep that in mind, I'm not done with it yet. After boot camp, the game as you go through Black Mesa, initially dazed and confused after your helo crashes before you're given your mission briefing by your 1IC. And later on, you encounter a whole xenotype of aliens different to the ones from Zen. Race X, as they're called, come from Dimension X, and were brought there by the Gene Worm. The game early on baits you with a fake objective to disarm the nuke the Black Operators plan to set off, only to later indicate that your true objective is to kill the Gene Worm, and thus prevent the Race X from terraforming Earth and taking over. If at least some of that sounded familiar to you, it should. Half-Life as you do the same things, but instead of Race X, it's Xenians, and instead of disarming a nuke, it's getting to the surface, and instead of the Gene Worm, it's the Nilanth. Keep it in mind, I'm not done with it yet. Moving on from OP4 for a wee bit, Blue Shift as you play as Bonnie Calhoun, a guard briefly seen in the intro to Half-Life, holding a flashlight and banging on a door next to the rails. Throughout the game, your main objective is to escape Black Mesa, and that doesn't change. However, your method of escape ends up involving helping a scientist named Dr. Rosenberg escape. Rosenberg, you see, was locked in a container by the HECU, as were some aliens such as alien slaves, or Vertigons as they're called in Half-Life 2 and onwards. Keep that in mind, I'm not done with it yet. So you and Rosenberg head to an older part of Black Mesa, where earlier teleporter tests were done, possibly before the Lambda core was even built, let alone had Portal integrated into its generator. There you both, alongside 2 others, escape, and surprisingly enough, you actually make it out alive and well. I wonder if the next game in the series will in any way explore what happened after Barney and co, possibly others, got out, or if it would just skip all the interesting stuff to go to a bad version of 1984, set 20 years after the first game in an entirely different continent and setting. No, that's stupid. They wouldn't do that. Nobody would ever do that, I mean, come on. The main thing about sequels is continuity. Someone who writes books would obviously know that. Anyways, Decay time. Decay is unique in that it has 2 protagonists instead of 1, and they're both ladies. Being a co-op game, there's less story content, but believe me, there is a lot that is established in this relatively small PlayStation 2 exclusive. Firstly, the Xenian sample, GG3883, replaced EP0021, the sample that was originally going to be used in the test. Secondly, the same memorandum that specifies that also notes that standard procedure will be deviated from in order to have the sample ready in time. Clearly, whoever this person from the admin office is, has full control over the facility, as we see shortly after the test goes kaboom. But before that, our ladies meet up with Dr. Klein, Dr. Keller, and Dr. Rosenberg. Yes, the same Rosenberg from Blue Shift. In their first scene together, we can see that Rosenberg vehemently disagrees with the idea of letting the anti-mass spectrometer go over 80%, a safety buffer. Keller replies that the administrator himself was quite clear. Interesting, seeing as the only letters from the admin office we see going to any of the characters involved in the experiment are from this Elam person. It's almost like he's the administrator. Surely our beloved experienced writer Mark Laidlaw wouldn't forget about this and use a name with completely different initials in the sequel. Right. I mean, like I said before, continuity and internal consistency are the very building blocks of a story. He would know. He's a writer. Anyways, Rosenberg, whose lab is located near the train yard, is also revealed to have been the designer of the anti-mass spectrometer. That's a pretty big deal, considering it's the whole reason everything went awry. So, one would assume he would know why it happened, right? Actually, yes, that is right, he does, and so does Keller. Throughout Decay, Gina and Colette work to undo the damage caused by the resonance cascade by turning back on all the mechanisms that were in place to prevent it, which were all mysteriously turned off that day, as well as by calling for help using the facility's uplink station. Rosenberg calls for the military and stays there to await them, while Gina and Colette go back down to the facility in order to fix everything. At the end of the game, the two, with Keller's help, activate the displacement beacons at the Gamma Labs to start a resonance reversal. That's right, Gina and Colette stop the resonance cascade. Keep that in mind, I'm not done with it yet. Now, remember how in Blue Shift, Rosenberg and the aliens weren't killed by the HECU, but instead captured? With Decay, you now know they were called there by him, and only a while after they got there did they get the order to kill everyone and everything. In Half-Life 1, it seems as if the military are all pulling back in an organized manner and bombing the facility shortly thereafter. Apfar, however, establishes that the HEC were running around like headless chickens after Neland's mana rays started to rain hell down on their heroes, and backups stopped coming. And the ground units got hammered by both the Resonance Cascade's headcrabs and houndies as well as Neland's alien slaves and alien grunts. Those who were left behind stayed behind and fought for as long as they could. Apfar also establishes that the Black Ops from Half-Life 1 were in opposition to the HECU, as their plan was simply to blow up the facility and evac themselves, killing everyone and anything that got in their way, be it aliens, facility personnel, or Marines. This implies that the grunts that captured Gordon at the end of Apprehension weren't planning to do it, but rather took the opportunity while hiding from the female assassins. Apfar also establishes that the facility got nuked a couple of hours after Gordon got into Zen, which would have been several hours after Bonnie, Calhoun, and Co. escaped, as their escape happened simultaneously with Gordon's arrest at the end of Apprehension, as seen by Bonnie during a harmonic reflux. Since they had an SUV, it's certain that they managed to escape far before the blast occurred and before any of the Black Ops Apaches arrived. Finally, Apfar establishes during one of its displacer cannon teleportation events that Dr. Gina Cross from Decay is dead, and her body in Zen. How she got there, or how she died is never explained. Since Apfar was made before Decay, it's possible her body isn't canonical. However, there's literally nothing going against the idea that she died, so you can interpret it either way you want. Would have been cool if a sequel were to include these characters in order to further develop their relationships and create an arc, but oh well. It should also be noted that the name HECU came from Apfar. Before that, they were just human grunts or the military. So if you've ever used that term before to refer to the grunts, you have Apfar to thank for it. Apfar also shows us that Black Mesa had been experimenting with Xenians and simulating their habitats for a considerable amount of time. Blue Shift shows us that Black Mesa's experiments with teleportation technology started far earlier than one might have thought, and considering that the scientist in the start of Lambda Core tells Gordon he isn't authorized to know about the portal technology, is something the company kept under the rug from most of its workers, and possibly even the government. It also shows just how much of the facility we never get to see while playing through the games, and implies there might be a lot more secrets to unveil, or rather, to be buried under radioactive rubble. Half-Life does when it's not the Half-Life game we want, but it's the Half-Life game we need. Modders, make it happen. And Decay shows us that all Gordon did was stop Neland's invasion of alien slaves and alien grunts. Controlled teleportation of aliens. The pseudo-random, seemingly uncontrolled teleportations of Xenians to Earth was stopped by Gina, Colette, and Keller. Not just that, but as touched on before, Decay, alongside Blue Shift, and to an extent Op4, show us that the HECU were originally not hostile to the staff, but became hostile. This was possibly due to the scientists, most of which didn't have clearance to know about the portals or aliens. not giving any information to the grunts, possibly leading them to believe the events were the result of subterfuge by the staff. This, coupled with the scientists rushing through barriers like the high-security storage facility, where we've got hostiles is set, and where the military gear such as weaponry and ammunitions are all kept, is most likely the reason why the HECU turned against the staff, meaning their order to shoot was in their eyes justified. They weren't just following orders, but they weren't heartless bastards either. Makes sense why they expected scientists to fight back. Now, the few of you in the audience that don't like Op4 or the expansions are probably cringing right now, thinking to yourselves, how does this address the fact that Adrian Shepard has no character and Op4 has no impact on quote-unquote the plot? Well, time to address some of the points directly. The rest of you, be prepared to hear the most unjustified, utterly stupid takes from the Half-Life fandom's finest. Seriously, it's really bad. You've been warned, beginning with a tweet by Victor.
Adrian is just a generic soldier who fights some aliens in his training. Gordon doesn't have that training. He is just a scientist aided by a suit that without he would probably die. Bonnie doesn't have a suit, so he needs the most luck if he wants to escape the facility.
Gordon does have training, though. Have you never played Hazard Cores? He gets trained on how to use the crowbar, the 9mm, and even the underbarrel grenade launcher it has. You see, HEV suit wearers are expected to be able to survive in Zen. To survive in Zen, you must know how to fight, so that you can defend yourself against the fauna and flora of the borderworld. So that's a lie right there. And Barney literally got out of the facility using a teleporter. That's basically skipping half the journey, if not most of it. It was lucky that he stumbled upon the dying scientist that could point him towards Rosenberg, but that's as far as his luck went. Everything else was survival skills and Quake-like movement. And of course, Adrian doesn't just fight some aliens. He does as much as Gordon Freeman did in Half-Life 1. He stops an entire race of aliens from fully invading and potentially taking over Earth, or at least America. Now, without the nuke, the Dimension X terrain would likely have kept spreading, which is likely why G-Man reactivates the nuke.
Freeman is a low-level Black Mesa employee, was directly involved with the Resonance Cascade, directly influences major events on Earth and Zen, has history with Kleiner, was goofy friends with Bonnie. And according to Gearbox, often late, Shepard did nothing, knew no one, has no connection to the Black Mesa research facility.
Freeman was not directly involved with the Resonance Cascade. All he did was push the cart. Stop over-glorifying a dude that basically amounts to an organic motor in the test. Everything that led to the Resonance Cascade happening was due to LLM's interference in the Anomalous Materials Lab's experiment with AP0021. Rushing them, forcing them to operate outside of safety measures, disabling all the dampening locks, etc. Gordon's history with Kleiner is literally just a footnote on the decay instruction manual and a mention by Keller. That's it. Everything else was invented in Half-Life 2. With no proper introduction to Kleiner's character, as far as the player knows. He's never met that dude before. That's not character development for Gordon. That's just ship writing. My dude, and why Gordon was friends with Bonnie, such personality and character. He was late a few times. Damn, now that's what I call character development. This is just stupid. Here's a question: if you truly believe Gordon is a character in Half-Life 1 and not just a vessel like Adrian, what's Gordon's opinion on anything? Does he have anyone he cares about? And I'm not even gonna mention the fact that Gordon and Bonnie's relationship was only ever established retroactively by Half-Life 2 and commented a little further in Episode 1. Prior to that, they were complete strangers as far as we knew. Maybe that's why people want Adrian to return in a Half-Life game, to have him further developed as a protagonist. I had no idea how you justify using information from a game that came out 6 years after Op4 to say that this other character has more development than Adrian, when at the time the character didn't even exist, and when he did exist, there was no indication that they were friends. And, Shepard did nothing and knew no one. Are you having a fucking laugh? You disingenuous, dense motherfucker. Of course he did something and knew someone, or else there wouldn't have been a fucking game. Shepard knew his teammates. Knew several people from the fort, as evidenced by several grunts recognizing him even deep in the facility. He knew about the mission in advance, was the only Marine to notice G-Man at base, and was a corporal in the HSCU. How the fuck do you expect a Marine to be connected in any way to a scientific research facility miles and miles away from his base? Anyway, no, seriously. Tell me a way in which it would make sense while still keeping his character's morality ambiguous so as to let the player choose whether they kill Staff or don't. And do I even have to say anything else about the did nothing line? Yeah, they did nothing. That's why we see Race X in Half-Life 2. Oh, wait, yeah. No, we fucking don't. Because he killed them all.
Adrian has nearly no characterization, for example. He also plays pretty much no part in the plot.
What plot? What plot? My dude, you mean the plot in Half-Life 2 that Laidlaw pulled out of his ass after skimming through 1984 and talking to some Bulgarian artist. The one that has zero connection to the first game other than being set in the same universe and having one singular returning character, that being Bonnie Cohn. Or do you mean the plot in the first Half-Life? Either way, you're a bumbling fool, because in the former case there's literally no way for Gearbox to predict the future and know what Laidlaw is going to decide to do with the series, and in the latter it very clearly and obviously affects the player's understanding of the plot, greatly expounds the lore, and shows what happened to Black Mesa after Gordon left Zan and killed the Nearland, as I explained in the first half of this video. And yet, no shit, he has nearly no characterization. None of the Half-Life protagonists do. That's by design. Ever heard of the term silent protagonist before? The game allows you to play as who you want, to immerse yourself and roleplay whichever way you want to, within certain constraints of course. As it is still a linear first-person shooter, Gordon Freeman has just as much character development as Adrian, and Bonnie only gets some characterization in the Half-Life 2 episodes, which, may I remind you, came out more than 5 freaking years after Blue Shift did, and was so well written that Laidlaw completely forgot to include Bonnie in the second episode. The reason people like him so much is because Valve didn't fuck up his moral ambiguity like they did with Gordon in the Half-Life 2, where they made Gordon into a goody-two-shoes hero who's revered like a deity by everyone he comes across, despite his involvement in saving Earth in the events of Black Mesa being minimal compared to the work of Gina and Colette. Neither of them get any recognition at all, not even a passing mention. Adrian never underwent that transformation from vessel to caricature, so people are attracted to him more than the others because they can project themselves onto him. Again, that's by design. Criticizing Adrian for not being utilized in the sequels or for not being turned into a predefined character with immutable attributes is like criticizing the Voldor for not having a predefined character as well. It's the exact same thing.
Or for has an annoying bunch of new enemies and too many weapons, like, why are there melees into pistols? The new mechanics are also not well executed. Barnacle Gun could have been better.
Oh no, the expansion pack has new enemies and weapons. This is terrible. Why are there pistols? Why does Counter-Strike have 5 pistols? They're all pistols. Clearly there can be no difference between them beyond that, according to you. To melees that behave completely differently. Clearly they should just have one melee weapon. The less weapons the better, right? Hell, they should only given you a single weapon for the whole game. That would have been way more fun than giving you the M249, the Spore Launcher, the Shock Roach, the Deagle, the Wrench, the M41, etc., etc. All of which behave completely different and allow for different approaches to fights. Absolutely terrible, I fully agree. Next stupid tweet.
Annoying level design, crappy enemies, stupid weapon arsenal, like, having loads of weapons doesn't make a game good. Oh, and Adrian is made, but the actual game itself is where the issues are.
Annoyance is subjective. You've never qualified crappy, and you never explain why the new weapons are bad. Look, I love shitting on games I find bad, especially Black Mesa. But when I do, I give my reasons in the most objective and clear terms possible. What you're doing here is not only completely worthless as a statement, but also just straight up stupid. Chris Bryan's tweets might be bad, but at least he tries to convey some sort of point through them. Yours are just I didn't like thing. It's bad. The game is bad. Now, that's all the tweets I have here. Honestly, that was really shit. When I started writing this, I thought I'd encounter at least some sort of agreement where I'd have to, like, reference the earlier part of the video where I explained the expansion packs and the main takeaways from them in terms of the grand scheme of things. Instead, I got a couple of subjective takes with no qualification or elaboration, and some outright blatantly incorrect statements made seemingly just to deride up for. Which is fine, you don't have to like everything, but at least there's some good reasons for why that is, please. Regardless, I hope you took away something of value here. If you haven't yet, I recommend you play through Opposing Force and Blue Shift. Decay is good on a story level, but the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired, especially in some sections where the difficulty spikes out of nowhere, but Blue Shift and Op for a consistently quality all throughout. And hey, if you don't like Op 4, all the expansions, you know what? That's fine. Just Don't go around calling them bad if you have no reason for doing so other than you didn't personally enjoy them, or did and no longer do. In conclusion, what makes Half-Life truly special is how the story can only be told through multiple perspectives, how you can follow each one as an individual story, or to have them all tie together at the end in a way that completely alters your perception of the first game's bare-bones plot. Is it a good plot? Not really, but it's serviceable. It might not be any Spec Ops The Line or Max Payne, but it has enough complexity in its timeline to be compelling, and to give the player a picture clear enough to be invested. It's also internally consistent and provides continuity to the events from the first Half-Life, which is more than can be said about Half-Life 2. Even going as far as to tie in the satellite delivery rocket you launching on a rail to the Gamma Lab's resonance reversal procedure. Basically, the story might not be great, or even unique, but the way it's told definitely is. The only other game I can think of that does something similar is GTA 4 and its expansion, where they all tie into one another with the diamond plot and the characters involved. Without the expansions, Half-Life would just stay a Quake-like shooter with some environmental storytelling and seamless level transitions. With them it becomes a story worth telling, one that takes stereotypes and 90s sci-fi cheese and incorporates them into an intricate plot about over-ambition, subterfuge, and government cover-up. Whether you agree with me on my conclusion or not, I hope you at least understand why these games are good ones, at least when it comes to their part in building Half-Life's story. Thanks for watching. And Chris, Victor, if you're watching this, all the cussing and yelling in my responses were just for comedic effect. You just have really bad takes on Up 4, possibly the worst I've ever seen. But I really don't hold any grudge against either of you, and I hope you won't hold any other. Hell, I don't even necessarily want to change your minds with this. At most, I just want to see better arguments, or at the very least, better clarity on what you're trying to say. Specificity. No broad strokes. No ambiguous takes. Be specific with what you mean and why you mean it. I'm not asking for you to make a virtual whiteboard for Up 4, like I did for Black Mesa. Just the bare minimum of clarity and objective reasoning. Though it would be really fun if you did make one. Find a standard that works for you. Judge a couple of games using it. Then judge Up for using it. Be objective in your analysis and they'll respond to it using that standard of yours. For example, my standard for judging games is to analyze whether something's design is compatible with the rest of the game's design, or if it conflicts in any way, and to point out those areas of conflict in order to achieve a more consistent experience. That's the standard I use to judge Black Mesa. I also like to draw comparisons between a game and another, where applicable. So for example, compare Black Mesa's Bull Squids to Episode 2's Ant-Lion Workers, or Half-Life to Zombies to Half-Life 1's, etc. It helps draw a clearer image to the listener or reader without needing to go too in-depth about game design and player experience. That's it though. I don't do this kind of response thing often as I feel it's rather petty, but I've been itching to talk about the Half-Life Quadrilogy's perspective-based storytelling for a while now, and I think this was the perfect chance to do so. I also despise editing videos, so there's that too. Anyways, goodbye and good evening.